Hello and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. In today's episode, Shyamala Praga speaks with Marco Pasqua about accessibility in voice design. Marco Pasqua is an award-winning entrepreneur, accessibility consultant, and inspirational speaker. After graduating from the Art Institute of Vancouver, he spent 5 years in the video game industry. During the recession of 2010, he lost his job, which turned out to be the biggest blessing in disguise. Marco decided it was time to use his voice to make a positive impact on the world, so he built his own brand as a professional speaker and entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, he has remained focused on social impact, keeping a philanthropic approach to the work that he does. Some of his most memorable talks include TEDxStanleyPark, the United Way as an impact speaker, and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. Throughout his life, Marco has also been involved with a number of organizations as a spokesperson, helping to spread advocacy for persons with disabilities across Canada. As an accessibility and inclusion consultant, he has worked with some of BC's biggest change-driven business leaders who are champions for more accessible, inclusive workplaces. It's through these experiences that he is helping to pave the way for all Canadians to have universal access to the programs, services, and places that they live, work, and play. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to The Future is Spoken. Today I have a very special guest, Marco Pasqua, with me. Is that how I pronounce your name?
That is how you pronounce it. Congratulations. You got it right the first
Yay! Awesome. Awesome. So today we are going to talk about accessibility in voice tech, and I'm very excited for this. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And it's always nice to connect with like-minded people who are doing amazing work. So thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah. So tell us about your background. What do you do? And anything you want to share.
Sure. So I am an accessibility consultant and inspirational speaker. I've been running my own business as a consultant speaker for almost 10 years now. But one thing people wouldn't know right off the bat about me actually is that my background is in the video game industry. So I actually worked for 5 years in the video game industry. I have a diploma in video game design, and I worked at Electronic Arts for 5 years of my career. But I stumbled upon the subject matter of accessibility and inclusion because what you can't tell from on a podcast is that I'm actually a person with a disability, and I'm a wheelchair user. So I have cerebral palsy. I've been in a wheelchair my entire life, and I actually avoided this subject matter like the plague initially because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as somebody with a disability that talked about disability issues, because I wanted to be seen for more than just what you could visibly see about me. But as a result of losing my job during the 2010 recession, much like what we're going through with COVID today, a lot of people lost their jobs, and I had to kind of question, is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And the answer I ultimately came to was no. And with the support of my girlfriend at the time, my now wife, she said to me, I think you were meant to do something so much more, and that is to go out there and inspire people with your lived experience, with your story, and to ultimately accept the fact that it's okay to talk about accessibility and become an expert in that space. And so with her support and guidance, that's what I did. And I haven't looked back since.
Is amazing. Yeah, definitely. There are very few people who actually come out of their circumstances and situation and really thinking about accessibility and really thinking about how to fix this thing, how to solve this thing. So I think you really had a good support system there and motivation for sure. So tell us more about Like Ventures.
Yes. Okay. Like Ventures, that's one of my latest projects that we're working on. And so Like Ventures is actually, like is an acronym, stands for Learning, Innovation, Knowledge, Education. And essentially Like Ventures was founded alongside the Yale School of Medicine's Center for Digital Health and Innovation. And we're a group of only 6 of us so far in our core team. And we're working to identify, recognize, and empower innovators that are developing digital technologies that increase accessibility for people with disabilities. So given my introduction, you can tell that this is something that's very important to me, but it was because it actually came out of this Yale board. They wanted to do more when it came to education of accessibility and disability awareness. And so one of the people who founded Like before I even joined the team, he actually admittedly says he was kind of stalking me on LinkedIn. He kind of saw my background and my experience, and he finally got, I guess, the courage or the gusto, and he emailed me, and he was very blunt and just said, look, I'm a person who is a facilitator at Yale, and I work with a couple of the Ivy League schools. We're working on this venture called Like Ventures, and this is what we want to accomplish. But wholeheartedly, I want to do meaningful work in the work that we're doing. I actually want to make a real impact. And I think that there's gaps missing. And I think that somebody like yourself with your background and experience could really add a positive voice to our team and what it is that we're doing. And what we want to do is create this conference where people from the technology space, the healthcare industry, and the venture capital industries can come together under one roof for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is legitimately and holistically look at the gaps that are missing in accessibility and technology and actually come to solutions. And in some cases, even support us to help seed or accelerate innovators or disruptors that are not even known yet, that some of the big wigs could learn about at people like Google and Facebook and some of the other big tech companies, and say, what can we do to help empower you to get your vision out there to the masses so that we can impact the world? And so I've been with the team now for about a year. As I said, there's 6 of us that are all experts in different areas and different spaces. Our biggest pilot project right now is our Like Ventures Accessibility Conference. As I said, we have it scheduled now. We just recently said that we're going to go primarily virtual because we were going to do it in Silicon Valley, but due to COVID and not knowing where we're going to be at, we decided to go primarily virtual. It's happening October 14th, and it's going to be a day-long event featuring keynote speakers, panels, and education around those 3 subject areas that I mentioned, with the goal of actually just having people network with each other, not operate in silos, and work together to affect real change. Because my biggest thing is saying, regardless of whatever purpose or drivers that you have as an organization, my thing is about doing things from the heart and being one of the good guys. And there's a lot of people who are out there in certain industries for just making a buck, and that's not what this team is about. This team is about making collaborations happen in a meaningful way. And so I'm so excited to be part of the Like Ventures team. We have an amazing team of young, bright individuals on our team that are working with us and that Yale board of individuals. And we're excited what the future has in store.
Amazing. Yeah, I like the full form of Like Ventures, and I would have never imagined like it does have a full form. So, which is really nice. And you guys are really doing great things out there. And I feel like this is the need of the hour. People have to start thinking about accessibility more and
Yeah.
more. And so, tell me about the conference. You mentioned this conference is a day long, and there will be everything will be remote, right? How are you
Mhm.
thinking about making it accessible for different kind of people? So that's where we can learn.
Absolutely. Well, as you can, I'm sure, imagine, going from a physical environment to now primarily virtual, there are things we have to consider that a lot of conferences are starting to learn now that we've all been operating in a remote society. Things like captioning, things like ASL interpretation, things like allowing for chat rooms or providing resources in advance so that if somebody has anxiety or potentially is on the autism spectrum, if there's additional things that they need to know in advance about speakers or panels, that they can have that information to sort through at their leisure. And I think that this is really, ironically, a better outcome for us to be operating virtually, because it gives us even more of a platform to showcase how people from around the globe, not just coming into Silicon Valley, but from around the globe, can attend and experience what it means to go through an accessible conference. I was fortunate enough to be an attendee for Microsoft's accessibility conference at the beginning of 2020. And I thought that they did an incredible job using their platform to pin ASL interpreters to the screen, making sure that all the videos were captioned, and really having a interesting dialogue around these things. Because our primary goal, as I said, is learning, innovation, knowledge, education is like. So we want people to learn something from experts that are in the space. We want them to incorporate those things into the innovations that they're working on. We want them to understand that it takes time to build the knowledge around a particular thing. And through this educational platform of being able to see different speakers and different keynote people, that they can actually walk away with at least one action item that they can implement within their organization, and that that being accessible doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So yes, from our perspective, and I'll be fully transparent with you, every single person on the Light Ventures team is operating this off the side of our desks. Currently, we're not making an income from this because we're operating as a not-for-profit to begin with the hope that this is almost like our launch party. This is our party to get people in the idea of becoming champions on our team, or at least wanting to be sponsors or partners or colleagues in the movement that we're really creating here. And I think that that's going to be the kickoff point in showcasing people, not only through the technology that we're using, but through our actions, that if we can do this, if we can put this conference on, then you can too, and you can make those changes within your organization.
That is amazing. A lot of things there for sure. You mentioned one thing that you want people to take away a lot of things from the conference. You want to do it for education purposes and make sure companies are thinking about it and implementing it, right? When would you say you or your Like Ventures efforts is successful?
Wow. I think it's always a moving target. I think that you can never say that you've reached the pinnacle of success, and that I think applies to any business. I think that you always have to be striving for greater goals. One of the innovators or disruptors that I really look up to, and I'm an investor in the company, is Elon Musk. I have investments in Tesla. I believe in who he is. I know that he's criticized from time to time for being a little bit kooky, but I love that about him, because I think that it's the people who think outside the box are the ones that are actually making the real change in this planet. And so I invest in that, and I invest in people. And I think that that's the good thing that what our team has done, is that we recognize what we know, but we also recognize what we don't know. And I think that in order to understand how you can move the needle or become part of real change, you have to develop a team that is strong and has experts in individual spaces. So for example, my expertise is in accessibility and helping companies with onboarding and inclusive hiring and built environment and all these things with technology. But we also have somebody on our team who's the director of marketing, who's so skilled at marketing that I can't even begin to say. And we have a very young guy who's working in the banking industry in venture capitalism, and he feels that he can put in together those pieces of creating portfolios of companies that are doing great work. And I think that that is really what it comes down to, is knowing that I'm not an expert in all of these spaces, but that each and every one of us brings something different. And that's how we're going to set our key performance indicators moving forward, is how are we continually moving the needle, and how are we inviting new people in the space that can help us to move our vision forward.
Cool. So tell us a little bit more about how is your company empowering people with disability? You mentioned a couple of things, right? You mentioned ASL and all of those technologies. And coming from the other end, we know a little bit about technology, like accessibility technology, but not a lot. So
Sure.
what kind of things are you doing to empower people with disability?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very broad question, but what I can tell you is there's a difference between accessibility and what I call meaningful access. So it's one thing, for example, for a building to have a ramp outside a door and then say, oh, people can get inside the front door. But then ask yourself, where is that ramp located? Is it actually at the front door, or is it at the back of the building near a trash can or near the dumpster? So that you're saying, well, by the way, we have accessibility, but it means that you have to come through a different entrance. But that's okay, right? Because you're just like everybody else. No, meaningful access is when every single person who's expected to use a product or service can use it in exactly the way it's intended, without having to feel like they have to adapt themselves to meet the function of the product, but rather that the product is already thinking about how everyone, whether you're 9 or 90, can use it. And I think that that is the biggest piece, is that we want to educate people on meaningful access and the principles of universal design, which is really what I'm getting down to. And you will know this with the line of work that you do. Autonomous vehicles is an incredible technology that is coming out. It's on the forefront, as well as the integration of voice technology. Now, imagine if you're somebody who's blind, who wants to be able to use an autonomous vehicle, but you were previously denied a license because obviously you're legally blind and you can't do that. Well, This type of technology is going to enable people in order to have the independence and freedom to be out in their community as an individual, not as somebody that has always an attendant with them. And I think that if we can provide the education where we're moving the needle to not only innovate in one space like autonomous vehicles or voice technology, but innovate in ways where all of those technologies can be utilized in different industries, then what we're doing as a ripple effect is actually creating a use case where those technologies can be used in different industries so that people can get gainful employment, whether that's working for Ford or whether that's working for my company or anyone else's company, because it becomes standard practice to use all of these universally designed products for every business so that you don't have to question anymore if someone has the ability to get the job done. You just have the technology to do that. And I think that that is the biggest change part of it, is that we're going to be able to help to introduce new technologies that can be used for a wide variety of industries and business sizes.
That's a very strong statement for sure. And
Absolutely.
loaded, definitely loaded. And one of the things we were talking about before we started the show was, Marco, that most of the companies think about accessibility as a regulation.
Yeah.
So where are we missing the point?
Well, that's again, that's another big question. And I think that the answer is simple. So people don't know this, but I'm Canadian and you're from the United States, right? So Canada and US has a really strong relationship with one another. And I hope that that continues moving into the future because we're very close neighbors to one another. But regardless of where we're physically located, this litigation or these regulations, they can actually act as unintentional barriers to creating real innovative products. And with the states, you have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was introduced in the early 90s, but it hasn't really changed a lot since it was initially introduced. Believe it or not, we don't even have an official act in Canada yet, but it's being developed as we speak. It's called the Accessible Canada Act. It's very similar to what the ADA is in the States. Now, the thing I want to make sure that people recognize is that sometimes we can get caught up in the weeds in terms of making sure that these regulations are in place because people are so nervous about being sued or about litigation. But where is the real challenge is thinking that if you slap a fine on somebody, that means that they're going to learn their lesson as to why it matters. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You can't tell somebody, oh, well, we have this new regulation that says you have to hire X many people with disabilities or X many people of color or these kinds of things. And then when they don't do that because they were maybe unaware of the regulation or whatever the case may be, you say, guess what? That's $1,000 fine. And the person's scratching their head going, wait, $1,000 fine for what? Well, you didn't meet these regulations, but I wasn't aware of these regulations. So I think that people need to stop thinking about how they can make a buck and start thinking about how they can make a change. And the number one way that you can do that is you can, yes, have litigation, but before you have that litigation, educate your target audiences on how they need to improve their spaces and how not only diversity of thought, but by diversity of ability can improve the productivity and the innovation within their organization. And here are the reasons why. And then you have an understanding as to if you don't meet these particular targets because you were maybe potentially unintentionally bigoted or you had biases towards someone or a stigma or whatever the case may be, that, oh, wait, we're actually giving you not necessarily a fine, but we want to let you know, we're going to warn you potentially. And then if you continue to make these slip ups, well, then maybe then there's a fine. But I think that a lot of these regulations, they're put in place to just get the money first. But then what you're doing is you're actually building up an invisible wall of resentment. And that's not how you're going to make real change in an organization, because you have to develop champions before you can change.
Definitely. So what I'm hearing is two things. One thing I'm hearing is there's lack of awareness. So many
Yes.
people don't understand that thing, that, hey, these are like some basic things I should be doing. Maybe part of the reason is because we don't think about accessibility in design by default. We think about accessibility as an afterthought when we
Yes.
have design solutions, right? So that could be one of the reasons. And the second thing which I'm hearing from what you said is there are regulations out there, but they have become a way of minting money. Like, well,
Yes.
you are not following the accessibility guidelines. Okay, here's a fine.
Yep.
So there's this fear factor which has been developed. And
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is getting away from that. And I really like that, thinking about more inclusive environment, thinking about more inclusive products and services needs to start from like accessibility by design mindset. And
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. And to your point, actually, let's change the game. Let's change it up. Let's not have accessibility be an afterthought. It should be the number one thing on people's minds. Why? Because it doesn't just impact me as a person with a disability who uses a wheelchair. If you design universally by default, you're actually opening up your product or service to a broader audience. And let's speak to those business owners out there. That's going to impact your bottom line in a positive way. Let's not have an assumption that because somebody has a disability, that must mean that they don't make money and they're not going to contribute to your product or they're not going to buy your product. Well, that old adage of if you build it, they will come is real. If you build it accessibly, if you build it with universal design in mind, people will show up at the door that you didn't even know were waiting to use your product. But now that you're showing them that you actually care about them using your product, not only are they going to buy your product, but they're going to advocate for your product. They're going to become champions on social media. They're going to be talking about your product or service, and you're going to show them through your actions that you actually want them as an active participant in the development of where you're going.
absolutely. So, shifting gears a little bit, you did mention voice assistants when we were talking about autonomous vehicles. So, what do you think is the different kind of accessibility things which is missing in voice assistants right now? So, when Amazon started many years back, it was
Yeah.
a smart speaker, it was just a plug. So, of course, it was not designed for people who have any kind of other disabilities, people who cannot hear or people who cannot speak. They were able to completely not use it, right? Now they've
Right.
been focusing on some of the accessibility things. Tell me, how can we design a more accessible voice experience for people?
I think it comes back down to the basics. Recognize how human beings use all of their senses. So even though you and I may have perfect 20/20 vision or great hearing, that doesn't mean that everybody does. And so what is a way in which we can design a product or service that utilizes as many of the senses as we can possibly integrate, that doesn't detract from the experience, but in fact adds to the experience? So for example, Google has their Google Nest Hub now that has a screen on it, right? And so could you incorporate closed captioning to what the digital assistant is saying in real time as they're saying it, so that if you can't at least hear yourself speaking it, but if you are able to speak, in some cases that is the case, if somebody's lost their hearing over time, so they were once a person who could speak and now they're still able to speak and they just can't hear that well, can you integrate captioning on the screen so that they can see it? A lot of people who have been blind their entire life may not necessarily know what a tree looks like or what fire looks like, but they know what it feels like. They know what the smells are like. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting smell-o-vision type of thing but is there a way in which we can create 4D experiences where people can be placed in that environment in a digital way or in a different way, where you could be utilizing other aspects of their skill sets, of their abilities, in order to get them as an active participant? And I think that truly is the future of this, is getting assistants that are much like the assistants of, say, Tony Stark and Iron Man, where they have where there is machine learning, but it's not just machine learning. It's that hopefully, and this is a dangerous thing, because when we go down AI and you start to get sentient beings and things like this is where it gets a little bit hairy. But I would love for people to develop stronger relationships with their AI to the point where that person understands, not with sympathy, but with empathy, that digital assistant understands that my name is Marco Pasqua, I have cerebral palsy, I use a wheelchair. So the suggestion you just gave me might not work because those directions don't work for my wheelchair. Well, if that assistant actually knows that I'm a wheelchair user or that I have accessibility concerns, maybe they could actually use some compassion to say, oh, actually, Marco, that's not going to work for you in your wheelchair today because there's snow outside. Instead, may I recommend this, or this? So there's more of a personal experience that is happening. And of course, as I say, it's a slippery slope that we go down when we start to investigate into AI of that nature. But I think that there's a happy medium where we can look at that person or that AI as a true companion that's an add-on feature or extension of a person's personality, much like my wheelchair is for me. I don't look at it as a medical device. I look at it as an extension of my personality. So for example, I'm a guy that likes to wear Nike Air Jordan 1s. I love that aesthetic look of certain clothing and things, but I also like to extend my personality into my wheelchair. So my wheelchair, I love red and black. You can see, because we're on video right now, you can see I have a red wall. My tires are also red. So understanding that our technology and the devices that we use are actually extensions of who we are as people, I think is going to be a really interesting understanding as we move forward in technology. And how can we really have our companions, our AI assistants, know at our core who we are as people?
Love that. I love that. Definitely, it's not just about empathy and sympathy and the assistant just understanding what you're saying, but being able to assist you and become your companion, become your guide. So it's really important. But you also mentioned one thing which I'm very curious about. You mentioned like if the assistant is responding back to you saying, "Hey, Marco, your condition, you may not be able to use the wheelchair and all." If someone is constantly reminding you about the disability, I've heard this from many people, like they
Sure,
they don't like being reminded because they have come to a term with their ability or
sure,
like any thing. I don't want to call it disability, but it's like
sure.
lack of ability, right?
Yep.
So what do you think, like is it just the prompts or is there any other ways to be designing about these kind of things when we are designing so that we're not offending anyone?
Sure. Well, I would say you don't necessarily have to address the disability every time, right? You could literally have it just be as sensitive as a best friend to somebody and saying, "Hey, I know that you normally go this route, but why don't we try this route because it's actually going to make your experience a lot that much better." They don't necessarily have to mention the disability, but they can be aware of the disability and they can circumvent that by giving suggestions that just make sense for the person overall. Like, for example, cutting down 10 minutes on their commute, right? Everybody loves that when they're using traffic apps. Why can't we do that when it comes to the functionality of, oh, you have a particular recipe that you want to do, right? Well, why not? Because, for example, that person might be allergic to shellfish. So they're not going to all of a sudden then recommend shellfish recipes. Now, that is not necessarily considered a traditional disability, but it would definitely be a disadvantage if somebody accidentally ate some shellfish and now they were allergic, right? So there are ways to be sensitive to someone's needs, and maybe it's on a sliding scale. Like everything, disability is a spectrum, and you might have a disability that's fixed. You might have a disability that changes over time. In the disability community, at least where I live, we actually call that term TAB, temporarily able-bodied. And that is that today you might be able to walk perfectly, but as we age, as we get older, those needs start to increase. And I think that we need to plan for the future so that we're not planning for the Marco of today, who's 35 years old, but we're planning for the Marco of tomorrow, who's maybe 65 years old. What kind of needs am I going to have in the future? And is my AI assistant going to be prepared to be able to be compassionate for me in a way that if I had a care aide or attendant who was physically with me in person, would address those concerns in a very similar fashion?
So making it more inclusive from all the aspects. So I
Yes.
love that. Yeah. So again, I was going through some of the articles which you shared with me, and one thing which was really interesting is the Q principle framework, which you have spoken about quite a few times. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, that came off the back of when I left the game industry and I started my business as a speaker. As I mentioned, I didn't want to be pigeonholed as somebody with a disability talking just about disability. And people always said to me that I have an energy about me. I don't know if you can tell, I'm a very highly energetic guy. I'm a very happy person overall. And people said, "I can't believe you're meeting the people that you're meeting and you're doing the things you're doing. How are you doing this?" And I remember saying in passing a few times, "Oh, I don't know. I'm just creatively utilizing my best energy to get the best version of myself out there." And people are recognizing that. And enough people started saying to me, "Can you teach me how to do that?" And I said, "I mean, I guess there is no magic trick to it. It's literally about creating meaningful and authentic connections with the people that you meet." And they say, "Yeah, but I really want to learn how to do that." So that's really what I actually built my business on, is actually teaching individuals and business leaders how to remind themselves of creating meaningful connections. Today, we live in a society where we're so glued to our technology, our cell phones, that we become reliant on the avatars that we've built through social media and through our different digital websites, that we forget that they should be one and the same, that you shouldn't necessarily protect yourself through an avatar that is out there that's only showing the best versions of your life. And so what I aim to do with the Q principle is remind people that no matter what title we have, we're the CEO of a company or the janitor, that at the end of the day, we're all just people, and that we have to make real connections with people. So it's that adage of, I don't know if you know of Gary Vaynerchuk, who's kind of a very sort of out there speaker. One of the things Gary talks a lot about is giving without expectation. And that is knowing the skill sets that you bring to the table and developing a strong tribe of people in your community or in your social circle that have those skill sets. And those are people that will always have your back. And so if you even if you meet a stranger, if it's a meaningful connection, if you give to them without expectation. So I meet you today and you say to me, Marco, I would really love to meet somebody in the music industry space because I've never actually delved into that. And it would be really great. Well, actually, as it happens, I made a really meaningful connection with somebody that I used to work with who was a music producer, for example. And because I bothered to actually write down the information of them and not just like brush it off at a networking event of like, great, let me just get your card so I can add you to LinkedIn so I can expand my network superficially. I actually bothered to get to know them and find out, oh, well, what are your dreams? What are your ambitions? What are your goals? And they tell me those things. And because I made strong enough connection with that person, when I reach out to them, they're not just going to ignore my email because they remember that I actually connected with them. And it's going to be much easier for me to then connect you with them because they go, you know what? I only met Marco a handful of times, but man, was he a good guy. And man, could I really utilize meeting somebody like yourself who works for Ford, who works in autonomous technology because of this new innovation that I'm doing on this latest music video that I'm doing, right? So it's about remembering that it's not always about what's in it for me. It's about what's in it for my community and how can that potentially, if they remember that I did something solid for them, what can they do to support me in the future if I need a solid from them too? It sounds like a altruistic, really like almost utopia type of world, but it isn't something that is out of reach. It is something that we can do today, and proof is in the pudding because I've been doing it my entire career, and it's why I've gotten to where I've gotten to.
Why do you call it CUBE?
Yeah, well, CUBE is the acronym, creatively utilize your best energy, CUBE. So it's just an interesting way to remind you of creatively utilize your best energy. And the reason I use energy is one of the first people that this is such an interesting story. I'll try to keep it brief. One of the first people that I met when I was building my business was Gene Simmons of KISS. So I'm not sure if the rock band KISS, but Gene Simmons is the guy with the very long tongue. And for one reason or another, I know that he's a master brander, and he brands himself. He's amazing at it. And I was at a video shoot for his show, Gene Simmons Family Jewels. His family was in the Vancouver area where I live. And I was asked to come because I work with a lot of not-for-profits. I was asked to come and speak about what they were doing. Well, are you kidding me? This was in 2012-ish. After when I just started my business, I was not going to miss the opportunity of potentially getting a chance to speak with Gene about my new business because I thought, hey, why not get the advice? So I was with his daughter and we were shooting a scene. And when the scene ended, I got the courage of utilizing my own CUBE principle and saying, hey, do you think I could have a moment of time to chat with your dad? I know you probably get that from everybody, but here's the reasons why. I have a new business, And I was shocked. She said to me, well, how about right now? And so I had nothing else to say, but okay. And she walked me to the green room where her dad was waiting. And I kid you not, this is how it went down. She opens the door. She says, Dad, this guy's name is Marco. He's a really brilliant guy. He's starting this new business. He wants to pick your brain a little bit on how he's developing his business. And she just shuts the door. And that was it. And I'm just kind of staring at awe, like, oh my God, that's Gene Simmons. And he goes, well, you're going to come over here and talk to me? And what I thought was going to be like a 2-minute conversation and he was going to brush me off ended up being about a 45-minute conversation. And he's a really, really, contrary to what you might see in his imagery, he's actually a really nice guy. And he's a really thoughtful guy. And as we were leaving, and I was telling him about the CUBE principle and the energy and how I utilize my energy. And he goes, well, that's great. Let me shake your hand. And I went to shake his hand, and without even skipping a beat, he said, that was a really crappy handshake. And I thought, oh my goodness, but I thought I could catch him. So I said, well, what you don't know is that my right hand is actually affected by my disability. So that's why it was weaker. And he says, I don't really care, and neither is anyone who's going to meet you because they're going to make their first impression on you based on their interactions with you. So it was with that conversation that he taught me about how to give a proper handshake, where the thumb and your index finger actually meet web to web, and you actually shake hands with intention, with purpose. And it was actually with his guidance in that conversation that I incorporated not only energy, but body language and how that matters. And even now virtually, how body language matters when you're on webcam. webcam. You and I are on webcam right now, but when I want to make a really pragmatic point to you, I'm going to make sure that I'm staring directly at the iris of my web camera so that I'm imagining I'm staring you right in the eyes. And all of that actually comes from creating a strong connection with people and remembering that the energy that we present to ourselves goes out there, whether it's virtually or in person. And so, and then it being a cube is a nice visual because a cube is a box, it's strong, has a strong foundation. So there's a lot of pieces. That's a very long-winded answer, but I wanted to provide you some context as to why energy and body language matters when we're meeting people, even if it is virtually.
That is amazing. I love the story for sure. I think it eventually boils down to connections and what kind of connections you make. And meaningful connections go a long way, whether it is in your career, in your personal life, or anywhere, even in the professional life, right? I mean, connections are important. And I like how you are telling, like, I mean, I thought about cube as the Rubik's cube. My son plays it all the time. So you
I've
know how
got them
all of these
behind me.
colors, so how you have all these different colors and different things combining and making one society. That's how I think about it when you're talking about it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no. And actually, that's a really good way to look at it as well. I think that it takes a diverse selection of people together in one sort of community to bring together the colors, the shapes, the mosaic of what we experience in life. And actually, I was just on another podcast, and I'll use this example because it will help to illustrate the point you were just making about connection. Is I've determined that there's three types of people out there in this world. Okay, there's connectors, there's collectors, and then there's jerks. Now, let me explain the three areas. So the jerks are the people that will go to a networking event before COVID, and they would have their business card or some sort of promotional thing, and they would leave those business cards or promotional things on every chair before anyone gets there. So they assume it's part of the promotional things, expecting that that's going to actually create a connection with somebody. They're going to go, oh, I need to look at this. Oh, I need that somebody from that service. And the equivalent of that virtually is somebody who just tries to add you on LinkedIn with no information about who they are, but then the second that you accept them, they start to sell you on a service or a product. And that's the worst thing ever because you don't even know the person or if they really want your service. Then you have the collectors. Those are the people that I look at as almost like collecting people like Pokemon, got to catch them all. They just want to add you to the LinkedIn so that they can expand their network, but they have no interest on even reaching out to you for sales or anything of that nature. They just want to give you their card so that they can look more important. But the real people who are making the changes out there are the people who bother to connect with you, who bother to learn who you are, what your goals are, what your ambitions are. And that's where you get the equivalent of when you meet somebody at a networking event, sure, they give you their card. That's great. Write down a few bullet points about who they are, what they said to you after you chat with them. Or better yet, I'm such a nerd that I actually have an Excel document of key people that I've met throughout my life over the past 6 years. And I actually keep a dialogue of this person, John Smith, I met them at this event, and this is how they made me feel, and this is what they said they were interested in, so that I can actually use the search function and say, hey, I think I actually did meet somebody in the music industry, and I can just type the words music industry into this document and find all the people that I met in the music industry and remind myself of that meaningful connection that I had with them and why it matters. And that's the point. You don't have to do the system that I did. You don't have to use an Excel document, but you just have to care about the day-to-day interactions that you have with people and how you can affect their life.
Amazing. Yeah, I like that. So, Marco, moving back to our topic, of inclusivity and
Sure.
accessibility. So, how can you think companies can make more inclusive experiences? Like, should they be changing their approach when they are designing, or should they be changing something else?
Well, first and foremost, you can't address the design challenges or the physical or virtual barriers before you address the attitudinal barriers. So I think that companies have to take a long, hard look at their attitudes towards how they're already seeking potential new innovations or even the people that work within their organization. What are the talent pools that they're looking at? Are they always going to the same places to find the same candidates? Or are they using diversity to look at different ways in which they can recruit new people, new thought leaders, and new ideas within their organization so that they can move themselves forward? And once they address those attitudinal barriers, how is that reflected in their marketing materials? How is that reflected on their website? How is that reflected in how people talk about their company. It's one thing to say that you care about diversity and inclusion. It's another thing that people can smell it from a mile away if you're full of it. And if you're just saying that in order to turn heads, but you're not actually doing it. So actions, as they say, speak louder than words. And the companies that I've found that are the most successful are the ones that are actively participating in events that are highlighting the things that they say they care about. So if you say you care about the disability community, is your company an investor in organizations or in technologies that are going to support people with disabilities? Are you out there at events that are highlighting inclusive employment? And can you Google that to where you were a platinum or a gold sponsor supporting this kind of initiative? Can you put your money where your mouth is and support that kind of thing? Because people with disabilities are going to look for you just the way that employers would sleuth whether or not you are a right fit for their company. People are starting to see whether or not you're a right fit for them as a life journey. And the same thing goes for product design. I think that you don't have to innovate something incredible right out the gate, but you have to have active focus groups and participants that we're going to be utilizing the product in different ways that don't reflect how you use products and services, because they may be able to think of solutions or ideas that you would never have ventured to believe in or to understand. And so that's actually one of the reasons why Like Ventures is so important, is because if we can get people of like-minded interests under one roof, but then they have so much diversity of background, of ability, of thought, that they can actually create ideas that we don't even know are on the table yet, but they can say, you know what, you didn't think about how the textures in this room actually make a difference for me as a blind person. So for example, where I live in Vancouver, the Vancouver airport has been very strategically designed with accessibility in mind. Not only do they have accessible features like when there's audible announcements that you have visual captioning on all the TVs of the announcements that they're making audibly, but the carpet and the flooring is designed in such a way that you can be instructed of, well, when you're on this type of carpet, and you can feel the difference when you're walking on it or using a white cane, that you're walking towards information desks. But if you're on this type of tile, that you're actually walking towards more actionable things like your baggage or your drop-off points. And so the second that you realize, wait a minute, you're using textures in the environment to indicate things that you can't see, that is genius. Or incorporating art in the environment that looks really good to those who can visibly see it, but you don't realize that it actually acts as an acoustic barrier to lower the echoing in the room, so that somebody with hearing challenges or challenges of being hard of hearing or deaf, they're not going to run into the challenge of, I can barely hear you because I'm already having challenges and now my voice is echoing. Well, by incorporating things that naturally create that type of environment is really, really special. And the biggest aha that any company can have is when somebody walks into a room and says, wait a minute, you just got an award for accessibility? And they say, yeah. It's like, well, I can't see anything in the room that makes it accessible. And then you say, exactly, because you shouldn't be able to tell by looking at it that something just works for everybody. It should just be. And that's the goal. That's the stretch goal that I want to encourage everyone listening to this podcast today. How can you create innovations that can't necessarily be seen by the naked eye, but they impact the greatest amount of people?
That is amazing. And I think that is what we should be thinking about. The experience should be such that it doesn't feel like, you know what, for this kind of user, we have this feature and it is very visible to the eyes, like you mentioned. But it should be something which works for everyone, irrespective of age, ability, and situation, going back to your universal design principle.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the goal. Anyone can Google the 7 design principles of universal design. I would highly suggest that they do that. It's very simple principles to follow when building a product universally. I would say that's a great starting point. I would say look at the people that are already doing great work in the space. Microsoft is doing a lot of good work when it comes to accessibility and disability awareness. So that's another company that I would suggest taking a look at from that perspective or that lens. And then, of course, if you're interested, learn more about Like Ventures. Our website is like.ventures. It's a very easy website to go to. We're in our infancy stages, but we're in that stage of networking and building up our connections. And for our conference, we're actually actively right now looking for sponsors, for people that either doing in-kind sponsorship of our event, whether that's going to be our digital platform where we're hosting the event, or people who are wanting to highlight the services or products that they're involved in. Because one of the cool components that we're actually introducing as part of this conference is an awards component. So we're giving out 2 awards on our inaugural event, one called the Pioneer Award and one called the Lifetime Achievement Award. And so the Pioneer Award, they're exactly what you would expect. Someone who's pioneering in the space, is an innovator who's brand new to the space, but is changing lives in meaningful ways. And then the Lifetime Achievement Award is exactly that. Somebody that's been doing this for a long time and should be recognized for their work. And it's really, as I said earlier, an opportunity to connect people who wouldn't otherwise be in the same room with each other, whether it's virtual or in person, and have an opportunity to chat with each other and help each other reach their common goals. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with Like Ventures. We like to say we believe in improving technology and improving the lives of people with disabilities through innovation and innovative technology. So that's as simple as it comes. We just want to do good work. We're not about the lip service. We actually want to do it. And we need people that champion that same mentality with us.
Yeah, definitely the vision and what you guys are thinking about is great. It requires a lot of effort. So first of all, kudos to you guys that you are thinking about it. And I've seen a lot of LinkedIn posts about different things and how companies and people are talking about accessibility and trying to push the boundary. And I think a venture like this will definitely try to bring together people and make more bring more awareness in the voice tech, not voice tech, but the accessibility industry as such for any kind of product, right? Whether it
Yeah.
is voice, whether it is cars or any such things.
Well, and let me tell you something. I'm a speaker that loves to get vulnerable, so I'm just going to go and get vulnerable with the audience because I don't mind, exposing myself in that way. But my wife is 5 weeks away from giving birth to our first child, and we're an interable couple. I guess that's a thing because she doesn't have a disability and I'm a wheelchair user. But you speaking of voice, because this will really intrigue you based on the work that you do, is our house, because of my background in tech, is fully decked out in accessible technology. So I have Google Homes everywhere and I'm utilizing voice technology, but even to the point where my crib for our baby to come is fully adapted. It's a raised crib that I can actually wheel right underneath of it. And there's bifold doors on the side of the crib that I can pull open to open up the crib so that the baby is actually at lap height for me. And I can just pull my child out without having to wrench my back and reach over the crib. But one of the cool things that we implemented, just because I'm a geek like that, is I implemented glow LED lights on the bottom of the raised crib so that when my wife or I are going into the crib at nighttime, we can just say crib lights on to Google and it softly lights up the crib for us without turning on the main light in the room. And that's one of the ways that we're utilizing voice technology. Another way that we're using technology is that we're using a smart bot to open and close curtains. I don't know if you've heard of the smart bot, but it's this robot that basically just utilizes voice tech to say open curtains and then it'll open the curtains for you. So these types of things, they seem novel or they seem like they're kind of small for people and they're not going to make a difference. But those little things make the biggest difference for me so that I don't have to wrench my back getting out of my wheelchair just to flick on a light. I can utilize voice technology. I can utilize other technologies that are going to support me to make my life easier so that I can just focus on being a dad. And I think that people need to remember that it isn't just about technology for business, but it is about just technology for quality of life.
First of all, congratulations. Yeah, this is great. And I feel like, what you've been doing and geeking out with the technology and playing and all of those things is fun. And maybe part of it is because of your personality and you are very keen about technology. But not many people out there are like you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do you suggest they go about it? Like, is it the education and awareness company provides? First of all, there's multiple parts to it, right? The company
Sure.
itself needs to have awareness about accessibility, should be my first thought, right? But then when they are creating these solutions, how do they even promote that they have these kind of features and people should be looking at it?
Well, one of my favorite examples to use that is not necessarily technology in the digital space is the company OXO or OXO or however they pronounce it, that has a lot of the kitchen products that you'll see, scoopers and things of this nature. Did you know that that company was actually developed because the founder's wife had arthritis and had dexterity issues, and they wanted to develop tools in the kitchen for them to have easier gripping use of standard kitchen items that you would use. And so he used the practices of universal design to create scoops and to create knives and to create things that would accommodate to his wife's arthritis and to accommodate to her ever-changing abilities. And this is not even on a digital perspective. But you know what he found? That it actually made it easier for people with, say, for example, Parkinson's, or say, for example, other kinds of tremors, or left-handed users, because now you could design products that work whether you're left-handed or right-handed. And so sometimes the most obvious of changes, they speak for themselves. So you don't have to have this arduous technological setup to say, oh, now we're accessible. Sometimes you can design products that just solve an everyday product or everyday problem rather, that makes a big difference for a wide variety of people. And that doesn't need to necessarily be explained. You can just pick it up and go, hey, this feels a lot better in the hand. This has a rubberized grip. This is no longer hurting my wrist. I used to have wrist issues, but when I hold this product, it feels much more comfortable than when I hold their competitor's product. And that's what everybody should aim for, is that will be your seller. That will sell the story. So the next time that I step into a Ford vehicle, I'm going to know that you have the best autonomous setup because that vehicle maybe greets me in a different way, or it greets me in a way that other vehicles don't, or it offers to customize my experience right away without me having to know what buttons to push, but rather it says, welcome, I see that you entered the space. Where are you going today? Make it an experience where the person feels involved, but leave the expertise to the technology, not to the person.
I love it. This is amazing. I'm enjoying our conversation a lot today and learning a
Me
lot.
too.
Of course, there are a lot of great things which you are mentioning, which would have totally never crossed my mind because I look at accessibility from a different lens. And I just look at the 529 guidelines or the American Disability Acts, and that is what I'm thinking about, right? But I feel like there's more, and all the points you are mentioning are great points which companies and individuals should be thinking about. It's not one person's job, it takes an entire like team to do something like that.
That's what, as they say, it takes a village, right?
Yeah,
And it takes an entire community to want to be part of that change. So if you want to be part of that change, if you want to actively contribute ideas that you think that no one else is speaking up about, then you know what? Use your voice. Don't be afraid to be a change maker. I think one of the negative things, and I don't want to get political, but one of the negative things that we're seeing in today's society is that when people start to speak up or speak their mind, they're so afraid that they're going to offend someone that they just decide not to say anything at all. And I think that that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous because I think that you have to be open to the idea that people may not necessarily have the same ideas or thoughts as you. And just because their ideas or thoughts are different than yours doesn't necessarily mean that their ideas or thoughts are wrong. So I want to encourage people to just respect the space that people have to express their self and express their mind and really push boundaries on people, because even though that conversation may be uncomfortable with you for whatever reason, you might get to a point where you actually start to agree with each other. And it's when you get to that point that you can actually meet in the middle and create something that is truly incredible.
absolutely. So I would like to switch gears now and ask you a cool question. So what superpower would you wish to have?
Oh my goodness, this is an easy one. I think about it a lot. I actually would like to have psychokinesis, and that is like telekinesis, but it also is the influence of thought. And now that sounds scary. That's kind of like Xavier from X-Men, Professor X. But let me explain. It's kind of like Jim Carrey and The Mask. You know how in Jim Carrey's movie The Mask, where whoever puts on the mask, it becomes an extension of who they are, whether they're good or bad. Well, I happen to be one of the good guys, and I really feel is if I could move objects with my mind, not only would that help me with accessibility, but I could also tell my legs to do a lot of better things. But then if I could change people's opinions because I didn't feel as though they were at least, and this is not to force them to believe what I believe, to go to what I just said to you, but rather to show them through almost like sharing memories or thoughts or ideas why I'm expressing that thought or opinion, or why I believe that's the case, and make them naturally, hopefully, come around to my way of thinking if it means that I'm trying to altruistically help the planet or help the world. So that's the reason why I would choose psychokinesis.
That's an interesting one.
It is, yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, wow. I never thought about it. So I don't know what I would say if someone asked me that question. So I have to start preparing.
Yeah, I would love to know your answer. So when you find that out, you email me, or let's get back on a call or something. You tell me what you decided.
I would definitely tell you. So
Awesome.
I asked this question to all of our guests. You know, my podcast name is The Future is Spoken. What does the future is spoken mean to you?
Wow. Well, I would say quite simply that it means that everyone has a voice. I know that that might sound token, but I truly mean that. I think that regardless if we're using old school analog technology or new technology, that every single person has the right to express themselves. And as I said in the previous point, I think that allowing people to express themselves in a meaningful way that is not destructive, that it, does not bring someone down or hurt someone, gives them the opportunity to have a voice that isn't necessarily always the one being heard. I'm an extrovert, so I'm a pretty loud guy, as you can probably tell. But that doesn't mean that I don't respect the quiet person in the room. Just because that person has a different personality than me doesn't necessarily mean they don't have valuable things to say. And so every time I enter a room, I want to make sure that the person who's quiet, that's keeping to themselves and eating a sandwich and making sure not to mix in, I'll say to them, "Excuse me, what's your name? Did you have any ideas with what we were talking about?" I always go to the person I think is the quietest first, because sometimes those are the people that are actually waiting for their opportunity to shine. And I think about people like Gandhi and some of these amazing change leaders who didn't necessarily have the loudest voice, but really wanted to make a massive, massive change when it came to global consciousness. And that's why that matters to me, and everybody having a voice. So that's the future that I want to live in. I don't know about you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every person has a different meaning of that. And that is why I love understanding what people think about it. Because my meaning of future is spoken is we live in a world where everything is connected nowadays, right? My son, he started, and you did that too. You did that too. And with your baby coming in pretty soon, you've already voice enabled everything and you've thought about all the possible ways to make your experience more comfortable. So for me, the future is spoken is more towards that line, like the future will
Sure.
be completely voice enabled or a combination of things. So how do we start thinking about it and preparing for it from now?
I love that. And I think that there's a happy place where both my definition and your definition, they meet in the middle and we find a way to do it, right? Because sometimes I think that people get too reliant on our technology, and we have to remember that we have one of the biggest technological devices already at our fingertips, and it's called our mind and our body and how they work with one another. And I don't want to get too sort of esoteric on people, but I think that reminding yourself that meditation and things where you can clear your thoughts and you can clear your mind and you can become a stronger participant in conversations and ideas sometimes means that we take a moment to reflect back, think about our most inner thoughts, and have our body be the biggest piece of technology that we use on a day-to-day basis. Because I think that we think that we always need something third party in order to extend our abilities. But I think that there's a lot more abilities to the human body and human connection than we've given ourselves credit for.
Totally. Yeah. I see that happening too. Like both the points what you mentioned and me, there's a synergy and there's a common point for that. So Marco, it was a wonderful conversation. I totally enjoyed it. So where can people find more about you?
Yeah, quite simply, they can find more about me on my website. That's marcopasqua.com, MarcoPasqua.com. And you can learn more about what I do. And of course, with Like Ventures, as I mentioned earlier, that's like.ventures. It's very quite easy to access. And we hope that you'll reach out to us. As I said, we're looking for in-kind sponsors right now. So if you reach out at sponsors at like.ventures, if you're interested in getting involved, even if you don't necessarily want to be a sponsor, but you just want to attend the event is free. We're not charging anything for it. We want people to be involved and get active. So yeah, thank you so much for the time and energy. I really hope that as a result of this, people learn a few things, and hopefully I get a chance to work with some of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll make sure I attend it from my end. And I'll also have a couple of colleagues and friends do that as well, because this is a topic which is very close to my heart. Like I still remember accessibility in user-centered design was my first presentation or conference topic. And it was
Cool.
way back in 2008. And my goal has been since 2008 to bring user-centered design process and accessibility together and thinking about design, accessibility in design, which I spoke about previously. So definitely I will make sure I attend it.
Absolutely. And to say what I said earlier, let's make a meaningful connection. Let's be connectors and connect with each other on LinkedIn if we haven't already. I feel like we've had a really meaningful conversation, and I encourage anyone who's listening to me today, if you do want to connect with me, don't be a jerk, be a meaningful connector and actually get to know who I am as a person, and let's work together.
I will make sure we add all of the links you mentioned in our show notes. And then
Awesome.
thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks for listening today. If you would like to post a voice comment, please go to www.witlingo.com/daa. That's www.witlingo.com/daa. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can find all the information on becoming a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions. Be sure to get in touch by using the contact page at the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We will include the link in the show notes. In our next episode, Rupal Patel, CEO of Vocal ID, talks about natural sounding synthetic voice. Until next week, take care.